Happy Easter, everybody. It's great to be together. I love a good comeback story. Come on, do you love a good comeback story? Love hearing life comeback stories. I love the story of John and of Crystal and of Don. I love sports comeback stories. Come on, I'm a sports guy. I love seeing UVA win the national championship this year. After 2018, the biggest setback, the biggest failure in college basketball history, a 1 seed losing to 16 seed, and now they win the championship, the national championship this year. What a comeback. Tiger. Hate him or love him, the underdog's back on top. What a comeback story. After 14 years of not winning a major, now he's Masters champion again. I'm feeling the comeback anointing for the Redskins. Come on, somebody, this is the year of the comeback. This is the year of the season of the comeback. I'm feeling it. Super Bowl victory this season. Anybody? Anybody? That would be a major comeback. But I love comeback stories. I think Easter is the greatest comeback story of all time. Jesus is the greatest comeback story of all time, that he was dead for 3 days. There is no greater opponent. There is nothing. There's nothing that we can face that's worse than death. And so Jesus was dead in the grave for 3 days, but 3 days later, come on somebody, he rose from the dead, and he's seated at the right hand of the Father, ruling with authority, with all power, with all control. It's the greatest comeback story of all time. And Easter reminds me, and I feel like it's my job today to remind you, that every setback is just a setup for a comeback. Come on, somebody. Every setback is just a setup for a comeback. Come on, if you're in the midst of a setback, it's just a setup for a comeback. Before Easter, before the cross and resurrection, I can't say that a setback is a setup for a comeback. Before the cross and the resurrection, death is death. When it's over, it's over. But the cross and resurrection has changed everything. It's changed everything, not even death. The most final thing, the most final phenomenon that we could possibly experience has been conquered. The cross ended with the resurrection. None of the gospel accounts is the grave, the last chapter. Come on, there's always something after the grave. That's that the tomb is empty. Jesus is alive, and that means the game has changed. Your failure's not final. The end is not really the end. Come on, if Jesus is in your story, not even death is the final chapter of your story. You might have experienced death of a loved one. We just walked through the death of a loved one with someone in our church family this week. What a painful experience. What a real experience. What valid feelings of sorrow and of grief. But even in the midst of that horrible pain and the horrific feeling of sorrow and separation. Come on, how many know we don't grieve like everybody else, Paul says, because we have hope. Because even in death, it's not the end. You might have experienced the death of a dream, or the death of a business, or you might have experienced failure or loss or disappointment. I have good news today. You're in the right place, because I'm here to tell you, and the Holy Spirit of God is here to tell you, that your setback is just a setup. It's just a setup. Come on, turn to somebody next to you and tell them it's just a setup. It's just a setup. Your setback is just a setup for a comeback. And so we're going to read out of a Leviticus today. I'm just kidding. We're not going to Leviticus. So y'all are like, Leviticus on Easter? What is that about? Go to John chapter 20. John chapter 20 is where we're going to be. John chapter 20. The other day, my son Roman, he's 6, was teaching my son Judah, who's 5. He's trying to teach him the books of the Bible. And so Judah, he goes, okay, Genesis, Exodus. And he's paused. He forgot what the next book was. And this, honest to God, this is what Roman told him. This was on Tuesday. Roman told him, he goes, it's the book that rhymes with the vegetable that makes your number 1 smell weird. You'll get that in a minute. Asparagus and Leviticus, never mind. John chapter 20, it says early on Sunday morning. And the Sunday morning that we're reading about is over 2,000 years ago, this same Sunday morning. I love this Sunday morning. Every Sunday morning is a celebration. There's something about this Sunday morning that's special. Come on, this is a big day for us, Easter Sunday. Early on Sunday morning, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and found that the stone had been rolled away from the entrance. Amen. She ran and found Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, which was John, talking about himself, by the way. Talking in third person about the disciple Jesus loved. And she said, they have taken the Lord's body out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him. Peter and the other disciples started out for the tomb. They were both running. Come on, everybody say running. Well, this is important. They were not walking. They were running to the tomb. But the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first, which has nothing to do with my message today, but I find it hilarious that John includes the fact that he beat Peter in a race to the tomb. It has absolutely, I can't figure out what it has to do with anything. I think John got to heaven and Jesus was probably like, why did you include that thing about you running faster than Peter to the tomb? And I just think John probably was like, well, Peter walked on water and got all the attention, so I ran faster than him. And I think God left it in the Bible just so we could laugh about it today. That's what I think, because it has nothing to do with, but this scene is interesting where the women go to the tomb, they find the stone rolled away. Other gospel accounts of this very same event tell us that they have that encounter where they find out Jesus isn't here. They go back, they tell the disciples. In Luke's account, he tells us that the disciples didn't believe the women. Right. They didn't believe them, and they didn't do anything. And it says, but Peter got up and ran. They didn't believe him, but Peter got up and ran. I can't help but think about when I read this, a couple chapters in my Bible before this, or if you're going back to real time, a couple days, 3 days before this time, I can't help but think back. When I see Peter, everybody else stays, Peter gets up and run. I can't help but think the last interaction that Peter had with Jesus, which would have been the greatest setback in the life of Peter. And it was actually the last interaction that he had. It was the last time that he saw Jesus. It was after Jesus was betrayed and arrested, and he was led to the court of the high priest, and Peter's following behind him. And as Jesus goes in, a little girl stops Peter, and she says, don't you know Jesus? Aren't you a follower of Jesus? And just as Jesus predicted, Peter answers her, no. Yeah. And one of the very best friends of Jesus, the one that had great faith, the one that Jesus looked at him and said, upon this rock I will build my church, the one who had flashes of greatness, the one who had great experiences, this same one, the very best friend of Jesus, he says, not only am I not his friend, I don't even know him. He denies even being associated with him. This would have been the lowest point in Peter's life. This would have been the greatest setback that he's ever experienced. When I look at this moment where everybody else is, I don't know, in the midst of their sorrow and in their unbelief and their disappointment, the fact that Peter is the one says, but Peter got up. I just imagine that over the last couple nights, Peter's had sleepless nights. I just imagine that his failure is running through his head over and over and over again. Luke's gospel tells us about this failure, about when Jesus is denied by Peter. It says that on the third time that Peter denied him, he locked eyes with Jesus as he denied him. He locks eyes, I don't know him, and locks eyes with the very one he just denied. And it says, and Luke says, and Peter wept bitterly. You don't just get over that. That's 72 hours ago. This is what I do when I read the Bible. This is where I want to take you into this moment to realize the sorrow, to realize the failure. Come on, if you're here today and you're in the middle of failure, if you're in the middle of a tough place, you can go to the Bible and you can find people that understand your pain. You're in a church with people who understand your pain. Peter had to be overcome with grief for the failure that he had just made in his life. I imagine that failure repeating over and over. He can't even sleep. I imagine the words, I don't know him, echoing in his mind over and over. I don't know him. I don't know him. I don't know him. I don't know him. Failure. The guilt, the shame. You're a loser. You're a sellout. I don't know him. I don't know him. I don't know him, only to be interrupted with the words from these women that says, Jesus is not in the grave. Only to be interrupted with words that are full of opportunity. He's not where they put him. Guys, Jesus is not there. And I imagine the cold chills that run down his arms. I imagine his heart rate increasing rapidly. I imagine his adrenaline beginning to pump. I imagine his mind filling with options that maybe this is not the end. Maybe the words that I spoke, maybe my failure is not the end. And he begins to sprint towards the grave because maybe there's hope. Maybe I could talk to him again. Maybe my life is not going to be defined by the denial. Maybe there is something else. Maybe those times that he was trying to tell us that he was going to die and come back to life, maybe they're actually true. We didn't get it. We were hard-headed. It's been 3 days. We have really lost belief. They're sitting there, but maybe, just maybe this thing is real. I'm praying today, I'm believing today, I have faith today for you that if you're in a place where you've experienced setback in your life, that maybe not literally, but metaphorically, you'll begin to run right now. To the empty tomb going, maybe this isn't the end of my life. I'm praying hope will arise within you and say, maybe I'm not a failure. Come on, maybe I don't have to be defined by my worst moment. Maybe my failure's not final. Maybe I could be healed. Maybe I can be set free. Maybe this is not the end of my marriage. Maybe my child will come home. Come on, somebody, this is not the end today. You're in the right place at the right time. Come on, there's hope in this place today. That's my prayer. He's running, he's sprinting. He's sprinting because he's a man who needed something. He needed something. He was desperate. And if you're desperate today, you're in the right place. It goes on, the next verse goes on to say, he, talking about John, talking about himself, stooped and looked in and saw the linen wrappings lying there, but he didn't go in. He didn't go in. Verse 6, then Simon Peter arrived and went inside. I'll just pause there. I love this. I love a couple things about this. I love the fact that when they show up to the tomb, Jesus wasn't standing there as the tomb greeting team. He wasn't standing at the door. He didn't pop out and was like, surprise, gotcha, I'm alive. He didn't do that. He didn't do that. He wasn't there. He wasn't there. And go with, where are you going with this, Josh? Follow me. When they arrive at the tomb, Jesus is not there to greet them because God has a funny way of making us face our pain. He has a funny way of making us come face to face with anybody that tells you that following Jesus, living a life with God means that you're not going to have to face pain. They're lying to you. You run the other way. Any religion that says that if you do this, this, and this, you're not going to face hard times, it's a lie. It's fake. Run away. The Jesus that we follow says, in this world, there's going to be sorrow. There's going to be pain. There's going to be tribulation. But take courage because I've overcome. This Jesus is the same one who said this in John 12. He said, I tell you the truth, unless a kernel of wheat is planted in the soil and dies, it remains alone. But its death will produce many new kernels, a plentiful harvest of new lives. And Jesus is obviously talking here about himself, how he has to die in order for new life to come. But the principle remains throughout our life is that death produces life. Failure produces fruit. You want to produce more fruit, you got to be cut back. The reward for producing fruit, Jesus says, is that you're going to be pruned so that you can produce more fruit. It's out of pain comes your greatest power. Jesus is not interested in taking you the easiest route. He's interested in taking you through the most effective route. And there is no power like a power that comes from pain. There is no perspective like a perspective produced out of pain. There is no purpose like a purpose that's birthed in pain. When they arrive at the tomb, that's not a good place to be. The tomb is not a fun place to go. It's cold, it's dark, it's death. What if Jesus is in there dead? What if it was a trick? What if they were lying? What if they had been misinformed? What if it was a rumor and it was false? But Jesus makes them come face to face with what would represent their greatest disappointment. because there was their hope, that was their plan, that was their purpose, that was their mission. They had sold out and given their life for the past 3 years, and they thought it was going to turn out differently, but he died and he was buried there. So at that grave represented their greatest pain. Wow. God has a funny way of making us come face to face with our greatest pain. Wow. Because when we can come face to face with our pain, we get launched into new power. When we come face to face with darkness is when the light is so much brighter. He's not standing there. I love for Jesus to intercept them so they didn't have to go through the moments of suspense, of wondering whether this is real or not, of not making them have to see what represented so much death for them. He could have intercepted it. Sometimes I wish in my life he would intercept me from the dark places. Come on, don't you wish sometimes he would just come alongside you? Hey, you don't need to go there. That's the grave. That's the tomb. Hey, let's just go this way and live happily ever after. But how many knows he's not there sometimes? And you're like, where is Jesus in all of my pain? And Jesus left you at the tomb to figure it out for yourself. And you're going, why? Because sometimes you have to see the grave in order to understand the power of the resurrection. What if Jesus was alive forever? That would be awesome. We would have a God who's alive, but we would be left to ourselves still today trying to figure out how to get to him. What makes Jesus being alive, seated at the right hand of God, so powerful for us today is that he was dead for 3 days. Never to die again. He's never died again. 3 days later, he rose. He conquered death. But he had to go to the grave first. That's what makes it so powerful. The grave was just a pit stop. The grave was just a chapter. The grave was just part of the journey. He had to go there so that he could take the keys of sin, death, hell, and the grave. And so now as he's seated at the right hand of God, there's more power in it. In your life, you're facing pain today. I'm sorry, but I'm excited because it is a springboard. It is a setup for a comeback. I'm sorry, that's sad, but I'm also excited because there's so much anticipation for what God is going to do through your pain and what type of story he's going to write in your life as you've gone through some of your darkest days. When if you don't see any way out, I have good news for you today. Jesus was dead, and now he's alive. He was dead, and now he's alive. Jesus made them face the grave. He makes you face your pain. If you're facing pain, there's nothing wrong. In fact, there might be a lot that's about to go right. Come on, be excited today. Be full of hope today. And then I love this. I'm going to finish with this thought. I love how this scene shows John come up to the grave first, right? Because John, you were faster than Peter. We get it. And he gets there, and what does he do? It says that he looks in. Now, I don't know, the Bible doesn't say this, but I like to let the word come alive for me. And what I do know about John is he was a sinner like all of us have committed sins. He wasn't a perfect man, of course, but you don't see many bad things about John. In the Bible, John has dignity. John lived a pretty successful life. Peter, on the other hand, Peter was wild, man. He was kind of crazy. He had lots of highs, but he had lots of lows. I mean, he was crazy. He had had so many highs and lows right before this. Like this last week of Peter's life where we pick it up, he's had a crazy week. He's had a crazy week. John, though, John's like upstanding. I see John at the grave he's peeking in. Because there's something about the dignity that would make you not want to walk into something as yuck as a grave. Peter rolls up. He ain't got no dignity left, everybody. There's something about failure that'll strip you of your pride, that'll strip you of your dignity. Have you ever had a bad day and you've about had it, you're about up to here, and somebody says something to you, and you're like, don't even, because you don't even know the day I had. I don't even care anymore. I'm about to go off on you. You don't know what you're going to get with me. You know that I don't even care attitude? I went off on them, but it's because they didn't understand the type of day that I had. I don't even care right now. I don't even care. I feel like Peter came up to the grave and he's like, I don't even care. I just about ruined my life. I'm a failure, man. I have no dignity left. John's here. I wonder if he's in there. Peter's like, move out of the way. I'm going in. I've experienced so much disappointment. Who cares if I go in and he's still there? I'm already at rock bottom. You know, there's a blessing in going through hell, because if you've hit rock bottom, good news, you only got one way, that's to go up. If you've lost everything, good news, you ain't got nothing to lose anymore. And so Peter goes running to the grave, and when he gets there, he continues. He says, I'm going in. If you've been through hard times in your life, I'm sorry again, but I'm excited because maybe it stripped you of the dignity and the pride that sometimes causes you to sit in church and just look at God. Maybe today you can show up to church, to the presence of God, and say, excuse me, I know you got your bow tie on. Excuse me, I know you got your suit on. Excuse me, I know you look like you have it all together, but I got to get into the presence of God because I need something in my life. I've experienced too much failure. I've experienced too much hopelessness. Come on, I'm here for it. I'm here to go into the presence of God. Come on, if you're not in a good place, or if you've been through a tough place, use it as motivation and fuel. Use it as your springboard. Use your setback as a setup. Come on, your setback's not final. Your failure's not final. It's a setup for a comeback. Your comeback's going to be so much greater because of the setback. God's going to launch you into new levels of faith that you would have never experienced if it wasn't for your failure. If it wasn't for the hard times. He's pulling you back. He's stretching you. He's pulling you back like a bow and arrow. And when he releases you because of all the tension, you say, I'm anxious and I'm depressed and I've got tension in my life and I'm hurting and I'm angry and I feel like I'm about to break. Wait till God releases you and watch how far you go. Watch how far you go. Peter had experienced the lowest of the lows, and Peter's the one that steps into the grave and gets a vision, and the grave is empty, somebody, and then John follows him into the grave. The one that had more dignity than crazy old Peter is the one that ends up following Peter in. Peter led the way into the place to see for himself that even death is not final. Peter's the one that discovered this is not the end. Peter's the one that ended up leading John into that place that they thought would be just another painful moment, but it was confirmed. He's not here. He's risen. And it says they went home, and the scriptures had never made sense to them. It says they had never caught it. Jesus had told them 3 or 4 times, I'm going to die. 3 days later, I'm going to rise. I don't know what they were thinking. I don't know how they missed it. Maybe they were thinking it was a metaphor. Maybe they were thinking it was an analogy or a parable. But at that moment, they realized, they went home and they realized Jesus isn't here. He's alive. I have news for you today. If Jesus is alive, and he is, it doesn't matter what you faced in your life. There can be a resurrection. It doesn't matter how bad it is. There's hope. If Jesus can come to life, anything can happen in your life. I'm believing for your marriage. I'm believing for your children. I'm believing for your parents. I'm believing for your family. I'm believing for your job. I'm believing for your emotions, your mental state. I'm believing most of all for your soul that might be far from God. I'm going to pray that your failure, I'm going to pray that your setback is just a setup for your greatest comeback. Come on, today is the day of a comeback, somebody. This is the year of a comeback. This is the season of a comeback for you. And if you believe the word of God, if you're excited about what Jesus has done, give him the loudest shout of praise. Come on, somebody.